Greetings, book lovers everywhere, and welcome to E-Train Talks. I'm your host, E-Train. I'm a 12-year-old literacy advocate, podcast host, giving Tuesday Spark leader, and of course, a really big book lover. As someone who cherishes kids' books for all ages and wants to do everything I can to advocate for early literacy, I thought it would be super special to highlight stories for kids who may just be starting out on their own reading journey. And if you're like me, you love learning about the world around us. And so today, I'm super duper happy to be joined by an incredible storyteller, an author who celebrates our amazing world and the interesting tidbits and people who have lived in it and made an impact as well. Who am I talking about? Well, I am talking about and with the wonderful award winning picture book author, Gabrielle Balkan. Thank you so much for joining me today, Gabrielle.
So happy to be here. Hi, everyone else.
So, for those who don't know, Gabrielle is best known for nonfiction books that delight readers aged 2 to even 12. Although I feel like readers of all ages, even adults, love picture books and should be able to. So, with curious and essential facts about the United States, animal record breakers, and so much more, I know everyone is tuning in is just as excited as I am to learn about your writing journey, Gabrielle, how you got into history, and a lot more about the inner workings of your books. So let's get right into it. So, a fun fact about me is that when I was little, my mom put up maps all over our house because I was super interested in maps at a really young age. When I heard about your new picture book, What a Map Can Do, I knew I had to share it as a read aloud to inspire more young kids to get excited about maps. Because maps are the gateway to our world. We may use GPS now, but they're also run on maps. So, I also love how you include a variety of different maps in your book, like the map of the inside of a body, a weather map, just to name a couple. So, I found this really clever and helpful for kids. And I also heard that the inspiration of what a map can do came about a bit differently than your other books. Will you please share what sparked the idea to write a book about maps for kids and what the process of writing it was like?
Well, first of all, your mom sounds pretty cool. I love the idea
She
of
is.
maps all over the house. Can
Yeah.
you give her my number? And then, second of all, you've got to look up the Osher Map Library, which is in Portland, Maine. It is this huge library devoted to maps, and I've got to visit a few times. They have an annual contest every year for it started off for just fifth graders, but they've expanded it to include other grades where kids draw a map of either a real place or some place they've invented. And then they have a contest where people from the Osher Map Library talk about the maps and they invite the winners in for a celebration. And if you're a map lover, you've got to check out this place, either online or in person. Uh, I think maps are really cool. And I love the idea of creating maps of unusual places. This book started with the map. The illustrator is an Italian guy named Alberto Lott. And he had submitted his illustrations to my editor and publisher, Cecily Kaiser. And originally, she was just going to go with his illustrations and she was trying to kind of craft them into a story. And then it wasn't turning out the way they wanted to. So they asked me if I wanted to join them in this project and figure out a way to make it all kind of hang together in a different way. So that being, which is I think one of your later questions, one of the fastest books I've ever worked on, I think probably because Alberto had done so much thinking on his own before I got involved. So he knew he wanted to include some Mississippi maps. He knew he wanted to include some maps of places in his neighborhood. And then we worked together to kind of make it have a storyline that took the reader all the way through. And originally, the main character wasn't a raccoon, but a pigeon, and we thought maybe we needed to have a new type of animal
Yeah.
to lead everyone through. And we figured raccoons are kind of like city animals. They have thumbs that can hold a map, so we thought that might be good. And then one of my daughters, her favorite stuffed animal when she was a little girl was a raccoon. So I was trying to find a way to include that in the book.
Well, that's super sweet, and I also think it's really interesting how you didn't just well, maps for starters, you dived really deep into them, but it's also really cool how you actually thought about the animal itself because it doesn't seem like the biggest thing you have to think about. But now that you hear it, raccoons sound perfect for the job. Plus, they're extra. They're
You
super.
know, my I could probably no one would want to read it, but I could publish a book with all of my notes about this book because I was thinking, do we want to give the raccoon a name? Should they be named after a famous explorer? Should they have this? And so there were so many emails with so many ideas that sometimes I didn't even respond to all of them because she said, "Okay, enough already. Let's just keep this somewhat simple and we go with the raccoon and be happy with it."
Yeah. My next question for you is continuing with what a map can do. So the title is really catchy, and I was thinking it could even be the start of a series of what other things your raccoon could learn about. Do you think you might ever consider writing any more cute raccoon hosted books similar to what a map can do?
Absolutely. And as you know, you and I were originally going to talk over the summer, but our schedules were hard to
Yeah.
coordinate. And since that time, the idea of a second book has moved even farther along. And
Wow.
so Alberto had, the illustrator, had a ton of ideas. And we are thinking of this as being kind of like an explainer series for things that maybe aren't as glamorous as other things you might read a book about, but that kids really, they're like hard topics to explain.
Yeah.
So I've always wanted to do a book about trash, and we thought about, could we have our raccoon take us through recycling or what happens to trash. Alberto really wanted to do a book on the internet, but that seemed a little beyond what I could
Right.
parse down easily. So I think we're going to go move forward with medicine, and I'm really
Ooh.
excited about that. And I have an outline due at the end of next month, so cross your fingers for me.
Well, I'm super excited, and medicine is something really important that isn't often discussed, like you said. It's one of those harder topics to explain, and it's also super important to learn about it at a young age.
Yes, it's interesting, it's important, and I sort of, my favorite thing about creating books is testing ideas out with students from the school my kids go to. And I mentioned the idea of medicine to a couple of kindergarteners, and they squealed and clapped and started shouting out things that they knew about medicine, like band aids and
Yeah.
Tylenol. And so we went from there. And in my research, I've been reading other books that have already been published for kids. And I found a lot of great books about going to your first doctor's appointment and sort of getting over maybe that new situation. But not as many books about different types of medicine.
Yeah,
So I think there'll be a place for it out there in the libraries of the world.
definitely. And my next question is moving on to another one of your amazing stories. In your book, 50 Cities of the USA, you explore everything from famous people and events to local attractions and historical sites, and even local food trucks and city parks. And of course, you've got to include all the really key facts about the cities. What I found extra amazing is that you include information on the diversity of people, the food and the culture of the cities. Each page just explores endless interesting facts and information. So, I'm curious how you went about researching the content for this book. I mean, it's impossible, pretty much, to go to every single city and find all this different information for one story. So, how long did it take you to write this book? And maybe you did. Maybe did you visit any of the cities for research purposes?
I wish I could have visited all of the cities. So the 50 cities was the follow-up book to the 50 states. And
Hmm.
for the 50 states, we had a really short deadline because the
Uh,
publisher and I wanted to have it out by a certain time of year. So I had 3 days to research and write every state. And then
wow.
I would send it over to the illustrator, who then she had 3 days for each state. And it was a little bit of a nail biter at times during that process. And I outsourced a few of the states to my husband, which was a good idea and a bad idea because he loves basketball. So all of his
Oh, yeah.
facts were about basketball. So then I had to kind of rework those. So for the 50 cities, I had an entire year to kind of balance it between this book and another project I was working on. But then I realized that 3 days was about the right amount of time to kind of keep me focused. Otherwise, the project would have taken a bigger life than I had to give it. Um, and I would start off thinking about books that I love that take place in different cities because that's really how I learn history best is through stories.
Mhm.
And usually one thing would lead to another. I would think about what types of museums that city had and find out a little bit more about the museum. I'd ask my friends who lived in Detroit, like, what do I have to know about Detroit? So this 50 cities in particular feels so personal to me because it has little details included from people I know that
Yeah.
about things that someone else may not find
Mhm.
important, but they mean a lot to me, and hopefully they'll spark someone's imagination to think about where they live, what they would include to make their to show how
Mhm.
special their town or city is.
Yeah. And it's also important on many different facets. You can look back to it if you wanna go on a road trip or something like that, or if you wanna even move to a city one day for college reasons or even
Yeah,
just as an adult. So,
yeah.
that's what's really cool about picture books. They can be meaningful in someone's life for years and years to come. My next
My you
Yeah.
mentioned at the beginning that, readers of all ages can read books like this, and, my mom's eldest brother, Chris, he passed away recently. Before that, he had dementia and was having trouble remembering certain things, and he would read my book every night
Aw,
to remind himself of places he had been, and that made me feel so, so good.
that must be the best feeling in the world. So, another one of your picture books really taught me a lot and kind of sparked a bigger love of art in my mind. So, your picture book, Georgia O'Keeffe, She Saw the World in a Flower, really stuck a chord with me. So, I've always been interested in art. I remember when I was young, my mom got this huge book of just a ton of Van Gogh paintings, and we even got to go to the Met and saw the Starry Night earlier this year, which is really a dream come true. And speaking of the Met, this is actually a your book is a part of the Metropolitan Museum of Art series. So, you share the story of Georgia O'Keeffe's life and her art. Will you share the story of how the book came about? How did you get the chance to write for the Met and their series of stories? And was the journey for this book different than others?
Every book's process is so different from the one before it,
True.
and so I usually think like, "Oh, conquered this task. The next time it'll
Yeah.
be so fast and so easy, and I can spend all my time like by the pool instead of working." But each new project is so different.
Mhm.
So this idea for this series started with DK, the book publisher, and the Met, and they wanted to include a lot of different artists and have a lot of different writers. And so a former colleague of mine who I used to work with at Scholastic recommended me for the job, um, and the editor, who was so lovely and so smart, Emma Grange, she was kicking off the series with four different authors at the same time. So she was working with all of us to kind of make sure that book in the series had some similarities to it so a reader would know what to expect.
Yeah.
And she did an amazing job kind of taking bits of all of our ideas from these different writers and then bringing them together. And so she might say to me, like, oh, our writer Amy on this other one is doing this. Could you work that into yours? And I read so many books about George O'Keeffe, and I had all these little tabs of things that I thought were interesting. Um, and the biggest challenge with the George O'Keeffe book is like with most of my books, there's so much more I want to include, but I have to
Mhm.
choose which pieces I think are meaningful. And when I visit with schools and classrooms, I always say, if every single person in this room wrote a book about George O'Keeffe, we could all write a totally different book because
Absolutely.
different things are important to each of us. Um, but I tried to include things that I hadn't heard about Georgia O'Keeffe when I was a younger student, um, and things that I thought would be vital to know about her, so kind of a mix of the 2.
Were you familiar with much of Georgia O'Keeffe's paintings and history before you wrote the book? And I know this is a really tough question considering you learned so much about Georgia O'Keeffe, and even I learned just from your story, not even including all the research that you had. So what was the most interesting thing you learned about Georgia O'Keeffe from your research?
I did know a little bit about Georgia O'Keeffe before I started. My mom is a huge O'Keeffe fan, and so growing up, we had her prints in our house. And if you look on the back page under the copyright, the dedication is to my very own Georgia Gray. So one of my daughters is named in part after Georgia O'Keeffe.
That's so
Um,
sweet.
isn't that cool? Yes, my other daughter is furious that I haven't dedicated a book to her yet, but I'm waiting for just the right book. I was surprised to learn that Georgia O'Keeffe was inspired by the idea of, I believe it's pronounced synesthesia, which is the blending of two senses at one time, like vision and sound. And so she was trying to paint the way things sounded. And I had a lot of fun thinking about that. Like my brain does not work that way at all. But I thought that was really interesting. And the one of the paintings that she does this in is called Music Pink and Blue #2, and I included it in the book.
That's super cool. And wow, it must have been really tough, especially at that time, to blend sound and vivid, like, works of art. But I guess vivid is kind of a combination in a sense. If something is vivid, I feel like I can kind of hear it as well, like flowing in my heart. It's like a flow.
Right. And I think, there are some people who this way of blending two senses together comes very naturally to them, like dancers moving their body to hear sound, like really showing us what the music sounds like. And when it's done with a lot of talent and hard work, it's like it's so beautiful. It brings tears to my eyes.
Yeah, it does. And my next question is, do you have you mentioned that you have a new book in your raccoon series, but do you have any other new books in the works? And if so, can you share a bit of a sneak peek?
Yes, I love sharing a sneak peek. So I worked on What a Map Can Do with Cecily Kaiser at the Rise imprint at Penguin Random House. And she had an idea about writing a book for young children about witches and kind of debunking some of the myths about witches, that
Cool.
witches have green skin or are always ugly and mean and out to like eat little children. And so I co-wrote this book with Shayna Grosky, who's a playwright, and she's written these beautiful books about art. And the illustrator for this one is called Carmen Salada, and she illustrated a book called I Give You the World. And so this was really tricky for us to figure out because we wanted it to be a nonfiction book, um, but also talk about pretend witches because it's fun to like pretend to be a witch and pretend to fly on a broom, but those things can't really happen in real life. And so, kind of figuring out the balance of witches as being true people who love nature and love plants and helping others, and combining that with the idea that some kids have of being playful witches who can make magic
Yeah.
potions. So we're really curious what the world thinks of this one, but I'm really proud of how it turned out. So it comes out next summer, summer 2024.
This is a question I've never really asked before. If you could live in one of your stories or meet one of the characters that you have written about, as you've written about so many amazing historical figures, if you could choose to meet or just maybe spend some time with one of them, who would it be and why?
Well, I kind of wanted to cheat and say if I lived in the book, The 50 Cities, that I could meet all of them. But I would love a chance to live in Alaska, in Anchorage, Alaska, and meet sort of maybe one of the people who participates in the Iditarod every year.
Yeah,
I think that would be so cool to have them take me under their wing and show me what it's like to live in the icy cold and live with all these dogs and keep everything cool. So I think that is something that will never happen on my own. And so if I could whisk myself into a book,
yeah.
that's what I would want to do.
My next question for you is kind of continuing with the sort of rapid fire kind. If you were not an author and you could choose any profession in the world that you wanted, what would be your second choice for a career?
I always thought that I would be a classroom teacher in elementary
Oh,
school.
yeah.
And I always was like, felt a little too chicken to commit to the time that you
Right.
have to get up in order to be in the classroom and the time that you spend with kids. So that feels like the most natural other career for me. But if I could do anything in the world and have the talent and experience to go with it. It might be something to do with theater. A friend of mine is
That would
involved
be
in the
fun.
theater, and I just think it's so cool to see how how a play shifts as you're writing it, and different people bring things to it. So that might be my dream career if I could do anything.
If you could have one superpower, what superpower would you choose?
These questions are too hard to choose between. Uh, thought was to go back through all the X-Men characters that I've
Yeah,
loved over the years. Like, it'd be so cool to heal quickly, it'd be so cool to be invisible, to spy on people, and then I was thinking, "This is a professional interview." So if
yeah,
I had a superpower to help my professional career, it would have to be able to talk to animals, because then I could, like, use that information in one of my books, and I think it would also be really, really funny. So my superpower that I would choose would be able to know any language, animal and human.
would you ever wanna turn it off, though? Would you want, like, an on-off
Um,
switch?
yeah, probably, yes, like, I don't wanna hear what that chicken is saying right now.
Yeah, I 100% agree, and especially if there's an on-off switch, that would be probably one of the best superpowers out there, and yeah, that chicken's saying some real wacky stuff,
Yeah.
Kinda
I do like seeing, like, little cartoons where they joke about, "Is to hear what my dog is saying," and it's something silly over and over, like, "Ball, ball, ball, ball."
yeah. But it'd also be sad if you had that power too, like, you might hear, the agony, like, of, like, an animal being killed. Now I'm
Yeah,
turning it to sad.
yeah, right, exactly. There are big things to consider when choosing a
Yeah,
superpower.
true. With great power comes great responsibility?
Like,
So now, sadly, it's time for the final question of the interview. I've loved this interview. I've learned so much. I'm sure everybody else has learned a lot as well and is leaving with new book recommendations. So this is similar to a prior question that I asked you, but I do not want you to choose something related to your books. Hopefully, you can maybe choose another story. So if you could be or meet any literary character, you could meet your favorite author or your favorite book character. Who would it be and why?
this one was almost easy for me because this is The Golden Compass by Philip Pullman,
Oh,
and the main character is named Lyra, and she has a daemon named Pan, who's sort of like her soul. And I reread this book a couple times a year. It's my comfort book. I think it's so beautiful. Um, main character Lyra is so passionate and so full of joy and love stories, that I would love to meet her or be her for like a day or maybe a
yeah.
year. So that's the person I would love to meet in real, and also Philip Pullman. I would be honored to meet him.
So, thank you so much for joining me today, Gabrielle. This has been a heartwarming, interesting, informative talk, and I've loved hearing about your writing journey. So, I'm sure you've made a lot of kids. Your stories make a lot of kids smile, and after this interview, once maybe parents or even the kids themselves discover your stories, there are going to be even more smiles in the world. And your stories teach and inspire. And I'm so grateful you could join me today and share your story.
Thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun and helped me to think about my work and the work of others in a new way. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, and I appreciate you taking time out of your day. I know we had some struggles finding the right date and the right time for our talk, but I'm glad we were able to work it out. And
Yeah, we made it happen.
yeah, we did. So if you're interested in learning more about Gabrielle, you can check out her website, www.gabriellebalkan.com. It's also going to be in the description of this video. And I've got to say, I know all of you agree this has been such a special interview. And I know everybody listening, you have got to check out Gabrielle's books and share them with family, share them with friends, and curious kids in your life. So I wish we could go on, but our time has run out. So thanks for watching, everybody. Until next time, stay safe, keep reading, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.
Bye, thank you.